I want to start with an apology. This is not going to be a super polished presentation. This was just put together in the last 2 weeks as we started to read the news and find out what was going on. I was supposed to present on a prediction model for the presidential election. Maybe we'll do that in the quantitative seminar or something. So this is not polished. This is just, in some cases, raw information, and you have to take it with a grain of salt. If I can help to facilitate discussion among many people I've spoken with who have firsthand knowledge of what's going on in East Asia, that would be a big help too. Also, I'm not going to attempt to give health or medical advice, right? Very happy about Chuck and Chris taking a kind of leading role in sharing information with us. It's been really helpful and reassuring to know that we're getting kind of up-to-date information and honest and so forth. So all I can do is look at what's happening, and I have a couple of interests. So first of all, there's a set of numbers involved, so of course that's something I want to analyze. And secondly, I do have a personal family connection. My wife's parents live in Beijing, and they've been, that's their home, and they've been in their apartment complex without seeing much of the outside world for the last 4 weeks. So we have a concern, a personal concern. So let me see if I can figure out how this works. Okay, so okay, we'll get started here. Just to, I wanted to let you know that Wuhan is not the name of a virus. It is the name of a city. It's China's 9th most populous city. And so found some pictures on Wikipedia, and this is Wuhan University. And the most famous landmark in Wuhan is the Yellow Crane Tower. So this is, to me, kind of a symbol of Asian art, East Asian architecture. By the way, just completely off topic, I did an internet search in the last few days to find out, what's the name of this architectural feature that you see so much in East Asian and Southeast Asian architecture. I assume that there's a name for it. It's called the something, and all I could find is that it's called a sweeping design and multiple eaves. So that's the best I could do there. Anyway, let's see. All right, so let's get a little information about what's going on. So there are two interrelated phenomena going on. People are getting sick, and we think we know what's causing it. So the virus and the disease are not, by definition, interchangeable, but they're obviously closely related. So it turns out, in the process of naming this virus, it's one of a family of viruses called the coronavirus. The coronavirus is not this thing. It's a family, and one of the viruses within this family is just common cold. So it ranges over a whole range of behaviors. It could be as mild as the common cold or as severe as SARS, and SARS stands for something. It's a severe acute respiratory syndrome. So this is the second SARS in the sequence of coronaviruses. So, and also potentially relevant is that it affects human beings and other mammals as well, which can explain why there's concern about cross-species contamination. Okay, so even though we're now in mid to late February, and we've just been hearing about this on the news for the last couple of weeks as it started to spread, it actually began. I believe that the first illness was recorded on December 1st, which means the person, whoever that was, patient 0, must have been infected in November of last year. The incubation period of the virus is treated formally as if 14 days is the limit. So if you're under quarantine and you're not testing positive for 14 days, you're good to go. And that's not really the case. So it seems that there are cases at least as high as 20 days, and now I'm hearing of an incubation period of 40 days. So that's somewhat concerning to know to what degree the quarantines that we've heard about, such as on the cruise ship, were really effective. Moreover, the virus can survive on surfaces. You think that there would be no support, there's no organic support on a surface, but there can be. So having the gel there is important, and of course washing hands with soap and water. There's been a lot of speculation about the origin of the virus. We don't know yet. But the original storyline that went out is that it had to do with people going to a certain seafood market or in Wuhan, and they got certain animals and maybe ate them or something. And it looks like that's not the origin of the virus. The original group, I believe, had 40 patients in it, and I think 14 of them had never been to the Wuhan seafood market, including the person who's tentatively identified as patient 0. So it's not coming from the seafood market. It's somewhere else. So let's see. Okay, so there was a small-scale outbreak in Wuhan. You had a few dozen people spreading to maybe a few hundred people, and this wasn't really on the radar screen of the world or even probably most of the Chinese public through the mid-January period. A few news reports starting to leak out, and then a mass migration event took place. So it's considered to be one of the biggest human movements in the world each year. I don't know how the Muslim Hajj to Mecca each year, I assume that's also a mass movement. I don't know how they compare, but this is pretty big. What happens is you have tens of millions of people, or more, hundreds of millions across China who are from the villages, from the countryside, and they're working in the big cities to make money, and then the country shuts down for a couple of weeks to celebrate the Spring Festival or Chinese New Year, as you may know it. And this is a picture I grabbed off of the internet. Not sure exactly where this is, but it's a train station or an airport or something, and you can see a lot of people moving through there. And so they're going home from the big cities, including Wuhan, and they're spreading out all across China. And then their plan is that they spend time with their families, meet their friends, their relatives, maybe infect other people, then come back to Beijing and Shanghai and so forth. So you could see how this would be a great incubator for the disease in China. This is where we stand as of, I guess, grabbed this image last night. The Johns Hopkins University is collecting and organizing the data from World Health Organization and Centers for Disease Control and other places. And they have a terrific dashboard that they've posted. So it's a website. Anyone who wants to see, I can email you the link. And so it'll be a great future study for people going into business analytics. But this is just one image of the spread. And as you zoom in on China, this big red circle resolves into various circles for the different provinces, and it's centered in Hubei province. So, but yeah, so there are some red dots that have been added just in the last day or so. Iran, so kind of a surprise, 13 cases now. Now where did that come from? Okay, so let's keep going. Okay, so I updated. I prepared the presentation and did the final updates last night, and then woke up this morning and the news changed, and okay, so updated everything again this morning. So this is as the current data as of this morning. So you've got, I guess, the top dozen or so countries listed by the number of cases and the number of deaths. Diamond Princess is listed on these websites as an international conveyance. Presumably, they're considering the possibility that there might be other ships that will be in a similar situation in the future. That hasn't happened yet. South Korea leaped up overnight. They have had a big outbreak there just in the last couple of days, although the cases have been confirmed in the last couple of days, but I'm sure this was incubating for a while. It seems to be centered around a church in the city of Daegu. Japan is having a lot of problems from people who got off the ship from the Diamond Princess and other people who were traveling on business in China. Singapore is listed here, and Hong Kong as separate jurisdictions. Singapore is, of course, an independent country, but let's also remember that Singapore is actually a city. So that's 85 cases in one city that's not in China. The USA number had been listed at 15, and I guess you can understand why that number went up, because we're now incorporating the people who were repatriated, who came back to us from the Diamond Princess. So, okay. And by the way, all this information, these numbers are coming from a website, worldometers.info. This is a place to go to collect data on population and economics and so forth. And they just put this information together about the coronavirus, and it's been very helpful for me. Early pictures of the mortality rate broken down by demographic. So it's clear that it's hitting the oldest people the hardest. People under 40 years old, I think the mortality rate is about 0.2% according to this website. I'm a little skeptical of the number being that low. And no pre-existing conditions, 0.9% strikes me as a little low, but it's certainly the case that pre-existing conditions increase risk as does advanced age. Okay, so I want to talk about the epidemiological model. So I had to try to teach myself a lot in the last 2 weeks about the mathematical side of epidemiology. It's complicated, even for me. I have a PhD in math, and I'm looking at how are you supposed to evaluate these equations. So what I did is I kind of simplified the model to something I could handle, and the basic model has 3 components. So it divides the population into 3 groups. So susceptible people. Susceptible doesn't necessarily mean everyone. It might be that a disease only targets a certain portion of the population. So it's potential targets that we describe as the susceptible people, not everyone on Earth. Okay. I is the infected people. R is usually described in the articles as recovered, but it also includes people who are not recovered, who passed away. So So I call it R for resolved, that the case is closed through a favorable or unfavorable outcome. But this model is the simplest epidemiological model. There are more sophisticated ones that allow for the possibility of reinfection, and then you go back to I. And in fact, in the current coronavirus, some people have been reinfected, and apparently they're more susceptible the second time around because the struggle with the first infection ends up weakening the heart. And then when they quote unquote recover from that, they now have a pre-existing condition, which then makes them more likely to die the second time around. So this is another concern. You're not ever completely, permanently cleared of the disease. It's not like you build up an antibody and you never get this again. Okay, here we go. Okay, so I guess I explained what the susceptible population is. So I want to talk about these two variables, R0 and CFR. You may have heard of them. R0 is the basic reproduction rate, the average number of people who are infected by an existing patient. So it has to be a positive number. If it's less than 1, the disease is probably going to die out. If it's greater than 1, the disease will probably expand. It's just kind of common sense. CFR is the case fatality ratio, the fraction of sick patients who eventually die from the disease. So I want to estimate that for the current outbreak and compare it to prior outbreaks, and also see how many people are in danger if we can estimate these parameters. So I came up with this model while driving in the car a couple of weeks ago, just as a rough back-of-the-envelope estimate, again, not being able to handle the complicated differential equations that are used by epidemiologists. So this is just, again, a quick, dirty estimate of the danger posed by a disease. So it has 2 factors in the formula, I guess 3, the susceptible population, and then this factor takes into account the number of people to whom you can spread the disease, and the case fatality ratio. So as I said, this factor is something I came up with while driving. I thought this might be somehow relevant to estimate the fraction of people who would get infected in the susceptible population. And it turns out I wasn't far off. This expression actually does signify something important in epidemiology. I was pleased to see that. It wasn't exactly what I thought. It's actually the fraction of the susceptible population that must be immunized to prevent further spread of the disease. So it's not exactly what I thought it was, but it is somehow related. And in fact, we can see that function here. So if R0 is 1, if every person passes to just one other person, you won't see any further spread of the disease. If R0 is high, let's say it's at 5, then 80% of the population would have to be immunized to prevent further spread of the disease. So the larger R0 is, the more the vaccination program has to be expanded. Okay, so how do we control the 3 variables? So you control S by containment or vaccination. So that reduces the susceptible population. Right? You reduce the spreading factor by quarantine. Right? And once the person is infected, how do you reduce the case fatality ratio? Hopefully by some kind of treatment. So different responses to the different variables in the equation. Yeah.
What is the difference between containment and quarantine?
So containment would be like the United States saying we will not admit people who have been in China. So China is kind of contained, like you remember containment of the Soviet Union during the Cold War, right? So that kind of containment. So there's kind of a quarantine almost around the whole country. Right. Okay. And then this would be quarantine once an individual has been identified as a sick person. So yeah, you got it. Okay, so estimating R0, this is all over the place. So the official numbers from the World Health Organization about 2 to 3. There are tons of studies coming out. There are websites that publish kind of raw studies from researchers across Asia and Europe, America, all around the world. And they're putting out papers. You could read these at medarchive.org. I can send you the link for that. You can read the latest studies. Dozens coming out each day. And these have not been peer-reviewed yet, so this is just raw. And at some point, it's all going to be filtered down, and the estimates will converge. But there are some people known as super spreaders, and they spread to a lot of people. We've heard numbers as high as 11. I read that a few days ago. However, there's a case suspected in South Korea, Daegu, at this church. One woman is believed to have spread to 40 other people. Based on all the other cases I've read, I'm skeptical that she alone spread to the 40 people. I think it's more likely that she spread to maybe a dozen people, and then they spread to their family members as second generation. And it needs to be known that the virus is active to the fourth generation. So there's kind of a biblical component there that going to the fourth generation. A meta-analysis of some of the most recent work suggests that the median R0 is 2.79, the mean 3.28, which jibes very nicely with the recent model showing that after the quarantine process, that the R0 is 3.24, but before quarantine, it could be over 7. And so there are other models, they're all over the place. Growth in cases outside of China, currently exponential. And I use that word with caution as a math professor. You see talking heads on television talking about, oh, exponential growth. Oh, the stocks are going parabolic. Oh, we've hit an inflection point. And it makes me cringe every time I hear these words being used in the wrong context. I use my words precisely when I describe the growth of cases outside of China being exponential. It is exponential. It is. It's doubling every 7 days. And I thought that was maybe a little bit too much until I saw the news out of South Korea and Japan overnight. Doubling of cases in Iran in a week. So it seems to be consistent. Okay. So here's a comparison of some of the more famous diseases. You can see, by the way, how incredibly contagious measles is, which is why we have such widespread vaccination against it. Okay. MERS, this is somewhat debatable about whether their R0 was less than 1. Okay, let's talk about CFR. What's the case fatality ratio? Among sick people, confirmed cases, what fraction of people will die? Well, how do you compute that? Total number of deaths over the total number of cases identified up till today? That's a little bit of a problem because the median time from infection to confirmation is 7 days. The median time from confirmation to resolution, meaning recovery or death, 14 days. So should we look at the total deaths divided by the number of cases several days ago? Should we, which I'm starting to do, look at total deaths divided by the total number of closed cases? In other words, we know how the case will turn out. So we compare cases where we know the person has died to cases where we know the person has recovered. And the other cases are just, we're still waiting to find out. So we just leave them out of the calculation completely. So outside of China, and I just updated this again this morning, 1,352 cases. Only 14 deaths out of 1,352 cases. So you would say, oh, it's 1% case fatality ratio. But wait a second, only 222 have recovered so far. So that puts the case fatality ratio closer to 6 to 7%. Okay, so it is serious. Now, there's a drug company, it's Gilead Sciences, and remdesivir is the name of the drug. So from the title, VIR, you can tell it's an antiviral drug. So we're hoping that a treatment will be coming along very soon. Okay, and here's CFR comparison. So some people have gone on television saying, oh, it's kind of similar to the flu. The flu virus has a less than 0.1% case fatality ratio, so it's more serious than that. I'm looking at numbers saying that it's kind of between the flu and SARS. Okay, so this is my process of trying to estimate what's the case fatality ratio of the coronavirus while we're living through it. It's kind of hard because what I'm looking for is what's going to happen down there in the future. So I used several different time series to try to estimate this. So the blue line is deaths divided by current cases. CFR1 is deaths divided by the cases that existed 1 day ago. The gray line, CFR2, is deaths divided by the cases that existed 2 days ago, 3 days ago, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I went up to 1 week ago. And you see that they're starting to converge. The black line at the top, CFR closed, is the estimate of the case fatality ratio based on closed cases. And that's obviously a lot higher because now we know how the case is going to turn out. So I said to myself, how do I know where these are all going to converge to? So I said, okay, let's take the geometric mean of the blue line and the black line. So on this logarithmic scale, it's going to be exactly halfway in between. And it's this brown or this copper colored line I call CFR Geo. And it actually is, it seems to be converging pretty rapidly to a level around 5 to 5.5%. So that's kind of my prediction of where we're going to end up, that these will all come in to 5 to 5.5% case fatality ratio. And it matches another model that I read about online. So, okay. So I put a couple of diseases, several diseases on this graph to show you the two most important variables. So the horizontal variable shows you the contagiousness of the disease. The vertical variable is the deadliness. So if a disease is extremely contagious, but not too deadly, we don't worry about it too much. We don't worry too much about dying from measles. Cases of diseases up here are very deadly, but they're hardly contagious. So as long as you keep yourself away from sick people, again, not too much to worry about. What we're worried about is diseases that are out here. So Ebola has a huge deadly potential. This blue dot was the original SARS. And the coronavirus, well, we don't know where it is yet. 5 years from now, all the published studies will have determined the numbers that we want. And we're still trying to guess what that's going to be in the future. So I have the optimistic scenario to the pessimistic scenario, and it's going to be somewhere around here. So it's very similar to the original SARS. Okay. Little a picture from Goldman Sachs about the estimated hit to the United States gross domestic product. They're talking about 0.2% of GDP. It's kind of interesting when you teach operations management and your textbook says, encourages students to construct global supply chains and to rely on just-in-time inventory. So, the conclusion I came to is you could have one or the other, but not both. It's okay to have a global supply chain, or you can have just-in-time inventory. But if you do both, then it's going to be a problem. So I didn't have time to throw all of this into the presentation, but penicillin, vitamin C, so many things, many other types of antibiotics and pharmaceutical products are manufactured in China, and China needs that stuff now, and they're nationalizing a lot of their products, and this is happening in other parts of East Asia, Taiwan, Thailand, that we rely on. We don't have domestic production for a lot of these things. So you have to wonder what CVS and Walgreens are going to look like a few months from now, and what's going to happen in our hospitals. I don't know if we have domestic suppliers. Okay, are we getting accurate data? So I can't do my job, without reliable data. So some bloggers in China have noticed that new deaths reported each day have been between 2.0% and 2.1% of new cases in China for several days, which is a remarkable degree of control. I would describe it as kind of suspicious. And an American epidemiologist examined this data and found the R squared of the model, the predictive value of the model is 99%. And she said that in epidemiology and public health predictive models, R squared, the predictive power of the model, is usually under 70%. And when it's that high, when it's that close to 100%, you start to suspect that the data have been massaged. Okay. So, crematoria in Wuhan. Again, we're getting blog posts, we're getting information indirectly out of China. There are crematoria that can handle 1,000 to 2,000 bodies per day of the total capacity in the city. And apparently they've been running nonstop and running advertisements to bring in people to work overnight shifts. And they'll pay them for one night's work, like a month's pay in China. So that in this time, if all these crematoria have been operating at full capacity, they could have cremated 50,000 bodies, and we're not hearing a lot about that. So I think more information needs to be discovered. And here's a slide from Tencent. So think of Yahoo in the United States as an internet conglomerate. Tencent is kind of like Yahoo in China. So did they accidentally post online the wrong numbers, meaning the right numbers, the true numbers? So this is a screenshot or a smartphone grab. So the red numbers are the number of cases, and yellow is suspected cases, green is recovery, and black is death. So it looks like, and this was, as you can see, about 2.5 weeks ago. So the number of cases was 10 times as high as reported, and the number of deaths was about 80 times, 80 times as high as recorded. I'm sorry?
Are these accurate numbers? Are these numbers accurate?
I don't know.
But different, yeah.
Well, I don't know. So again, this is raw. We don't know.
But they took that down,
yes.
Not that anymore.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Oh yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So this was now the correct version.
Correct.
Yes. So I don't know. So I just have one more slide. What the CDC says. The novel coronavirus is with us and is likely to reappear in coming years. So the virus is now part of the ecosystem. It's part of the biosphere. They don't go away, except for, I guess, the smallpox virus was eradicated. Polio has not even been eradicated completely off of the face of the earth. This is a fairly contagious disease, and it's something we're going to have to live with. I expect that we will be developing a vaccine this year, which will be good, and a lot of people will be getting it, and the treatment will be coming online soon. But so I don't want to encourage panic, but I don't want to encourage people to say, oh, this is nothing. So I would say watchful awareness, which should be our motto. So that's all I have. Thanks.
Did you get any age statistics at all? Average age of death?
Yeah, so that was, all right. So you're going to have to get notes from your classmates here. Yeah. That serves you right for coming into class late. Yeah, let me see. There we go. That's the one. So, yeah, so there's a huge differential for the elderly. And it appears in young people, they claim that that's a low mortality rate. Now, the person I think of, when I think of under 40, there's very little risk of mortality. The person I think of is Dr. Li Liang is the doctor who, the ophthalmologist in Wuhan, who tried to warn the other people in his hospital about this virus, and he was arrested, and so they gave him a stern warning, and then he died in the hospital where you'd think he would get the best treatment. So I'm kind of a little suspicious about that event myself. So, yeah.
In the previous
Yes, Fatma.
report that you had like Iran had 4 fatalities? Really? 4 deaths? The table right before that. By country. Right, yeah, this one. Iran has 4 deaths?
So far,
18 cases and 4 deaths?
yes, and 18 cases.
18 cases understandable, but 4 deaths?
Yeah,
I'm just surprised by the number.
yes.
The highest among all of them except China, of course. So China, in terms of number of deaths, it will be China and then Iran. Number 2.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of,
So the GDP number is quite interesting because when you read the commentary and listen to it, I've seen both articles. I've seen people saying it's a kitchen sink quarter because really if it's done by May or June, you expect that demand to ramp up. But then I also think that the other side is if our CVS stores do start running short of items, what drives the U.S. economy most is consumer demand. And so if they start seeing those concerns, they might pull back. That's where I see the other side of the argument. Goldman Sachs is presented. I've seen these financial firms go back and forth on softness in Q1, early Q2, and then I see some people going on the far extreme saying recession. I think it's not that far, but I do think if consumers start getting scared, that's where you see a pullback in economic spending. Plus, supply chains are already disrupted in China and here.
Yeah. So, right. So, I don't know what it would take for the American public to get scared, but certainly if supply chains are interrupted, then what happens to the pent-up demand? You can't make certain purchases, and then China is not just supplying kind of consumer electronics; they're also components for other products that are finished in America. So that. That is a danger. It's a risk for the American economy. It could be serious. It's a black swan for sure.
Actually, Apple announced the earnings just a few days ago, and they said that the earnings would be less than expected, and they said it's a both. It's supply side and demand side.
Yeah.
Not only one.
Yeah.
It's not only supply and demand. It's supply and demand on one side. There is goods and services on the other, and there is also internal and external capital movements. The 3 factors are affected by the epidemic.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and look how hard this is hitting Japan and South Korea, particularly 2 developed economies. I mean, we just signed trade agreements with all of these countries, and now I don't know how that's going to affect America. And, yes.
The supply chain, even before this coronavirus episode, the trade, remember the trade fight between the United States and China? And a lot of Chinese business owners already moved their plants from Shenzhen and other places into Thailand, Vietnam, and even Laos and Cambodia, really cheap. So now you see more, especially the businessmen saw that opportunity and they purchased lots of plants in those cheap countries and started manufacturing